Okay, everybody. So this is the review for the exam that'll be due on Saturday. It's going to cover weeks 2 through 5, and I have the study guide posted in the announcement section as well as in the second week module. So the first thing we're going to talk about is federalism. Be able to define sub-elites. Usually those are, we've been talking about elitism. Sub-elites are elites that are elites within the local and the state governments. Generally know that people have more confidence in state and local government than federal government. We kind of talked about how, the fact that since local governments and state governments, elected officials are a little bit more accessible, sometimes that's a measure on how people will, maybe trust government a little bit more. Federal government, it's hard to get in touch with them. Just remember that. Know that there's approximately about 86,000 different types of governments here in the United States. And that is, most of these governments are going to be at the local level. Obviously, we have the federal government and the state government, and then a lot of these other governments are going to be on the local levels, like school boards, public utilities commissions, water boards, community college boards, city councils, supervisors, county supervisors, and so on. Know what the 10th Amendment does and how the 10th Amendment guarantees the states that they can pass laws as long as they do not conflict with the Constitution or infringe on any of the delegated powers that the Constitution gives Congress. And obviously, one of those powers that the states cannot do is coin money. Only the federal government can do that. And those delegated powers are those 18 powers that we see in the Constitution, the enumerated powers. Concurrent powers might be something like taxation. Remember, states can also tax. So here in California, we pay a federal tax and we also pay a state income tax. Know some state, special, and local duties, special districts and local duties like school boards. The state government runs things like the DMV, administer social welfare programs with money from the states. Know the different types of federalism. Know marble cake federalism, which is a metaphor for cooperative federalism, when you have, the federal government and the state government kind of sharing different types of duties. And know what dual federalism is, kind of the where we have during the first 100 years of our country, the relationship among the federal government and the state government could be called dual federalism, where the state government will have certain powers, the federal government will have certain powers, and they don't really commingle, or they don't really mix. Know what the Adam Walsh Child Safety Protection Act is. It has to do with the necessary and proper clause. Remember that the necessary and proper clause is part of the Constitution that says if the Congress that gives Congress kind of a little bit of latitude to pass laws that help them enforce their delegated powers. And we talked about the Adam Walsh Child Safety Protection and Safety Act, where it was eventually challenged by a case called United States versus Comstock. Comstock was an inmate that was detained past his release date. The Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act made it okay for governments to detain people past their release date if they're still considered to be a danger to society. With that being said, it was challenged constitutionally, and it was found that in order for the Congress to be able to execute one of their powers, this necessary proper clause was able to kind of be expanded and in the sense help Congress accomplish one of their powers. And that was the power to establish a criminal justice system and a court system. Don't worry about the interstate commerce clause. No examples of federalism. We have a federal government, a state government, and a local government. Federal governments and state governments can share or can have concurrent powers like we discussed. Know what a federal mandate is, something like Obamacare. Obamacare had the individual mandate as a part of it, which requires us to have insurance. That was eventually taken away by the Trump administration. Another example of a federal mandate within Obamacare is that all states were required to set up exchanges and enter into contracts with health insurance companies to help provide insurance for people that lived in their state. And if the states failed to do this, they could run the risk of losing federal funding. Another example may be something like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is an act that is put on the place on both private businesses as well as public sector governments as well, where you have to make your facilities compliant to and accessible for people with disabilities. If a state or a business does not adhere to this law, they can run the risk of being fined or sued. So, those are examples of federal mandates. Let's talk about the 1900s now. So, the 1900s was it was a pretty small chapter. The Bessemer Project helped create a lot of wealth for Carnegie, where they were able to convert some of this to steel. And also remember the 17th Amendment, which was used to weed out corruption in government by giving the people the ability to vote for their senators as opposed to state legislatures voting for the senators. Okay, let's talk about the Progressive Era. So remember, there was a lot of corruption in the late 1800s with regards to having political machines. The spoils system was a system that was used to grant jobs to supporters of elected officials that had participated in the campaigns. This led to a lot of inefficiency, a lot of corruption, and as a result, we saw kind of cronyism in people, being put in jobs that they may not really be qualified for. There was something called the Pendleton Act, which was put into place to have hiring for elected officials based off of merit as opposed to whoever you support. So that's what we're talking about here. Know what the Homestead Act is? The Homestead Act is a lot of granted people land. Obviously, there are people that were already occupying that land. So another one of violations of our of civil liberties in our history. Know the definition of laissez-faire economics, which is kind of the Adam Smith theory of a free market capitalist society where the government should keep their hands off the economy and let the economy guide itself. Know what Teddy Roosevelt's domestic policy was? A lot of that included the Square Deal, which was intended to prevent or reverse the abuses created by unregulated businesses. And you could see down here things like the Elkins Act, the Sherman Act, the Meat Inspection, Pure Food and Drug Act, which were all put into place to kind of curb some of the kind of the running rampant of businesses where we had monopolies forming. We had people working in facilities that weren't safe, child labor, a bunch of different things that were put into place in order to help prevent abuses from kind of an unregulated business system. Know what the 16th Amendment was? That was the amendment that introduced the federal income tax. Know the 17th Amendment, which we talked about. The 18th Amendment, which prohibited the manufacturing and sale of alcohol. The 19th Amendment, which gave women suffrage in 1920, which allowed women the right to vote. Know what the Panama Canal and the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty of 1901 was? Remember that it was difficult for ships to sail all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast or vice versa, because you had to sail around South America. Hay-Pauncefote Treaty created the Panama Canal, which in a sense made it easier for ships to navigate and kind of created a shortcut for them in order that they don't have to go around the bottom of South America. Know what the Platt Amendment was and how the Platt Amendment in 1901 was a resolution of Congress that said all treaties with Cuba had to be approved by the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. had the right to interfere in Cuba's affairs if orders broke down. That's why we have Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. It's a U.S. territory, even though it's part of Cuba. And we'll actually talk about Cuba in a little bit more detail when we get to the 1960s. And just know the basics of the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. It basically stated that the U.S. would intervene in Latin American countries where European powers sought to collect debts or whose governments they thought could be unstable. Okay, just basically on World War I and interest groups. Know the cause of World War I, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Just basics of that. And kind of Wilsonianism, where we saw, Wilson's ambition to kind of spread democracy throughout the world. And kind of a really progressive era, or a progressive, maybe not should use that term, but a progressive form of view. He also had his 14 points where, open diplomacy without treaties, a free trade system, decrease, any hiccups that may exist within trade. Okay, know what PACs are. We're going to talk about interest groups now. And PACs are political action committees that they usually act as kind of the banks for campaigns or political parties or special interest. And usually people will contribute, citizens, businesses. Know what access is, and when we talk about access is the most important thing to have within a lobbyist system in order to get to communicate with decision makers or elected officials. And organized interests must get access, and that's really important. And why do former members become lobbyists? Former members of Congress become lobbyists is because they already have that personal connection with decision makers. They may have their phone number, they may have their email address, they know the staff, they know how the legislative system works. So that's one of the advantages that a former member of Congress will be hired on as a lobbyist. And it's simple because sometimes these members of Congress can make more money being a lobbyist, former members of Congress. And lobbyists can provide information on issues such as, expertise, where a certain interest group may stand on an issue, and they have knowledge of the legislative process. But remember, these lobbyists must report directly to the government who they are and how much they spend. So that's a very important thing to remember. Know what super PACs are? Usually a super PAC is a political action committee that is formed by a corporation or a labor union that has unregular or unlimited amounts of money they can spend, as long as they're not coordinated the uh, with the candidate. So say hypothetically, I was to run for president, and you ran a super PAC. You could support me or oppose me, but I cannot give you direction on use of super PAC money, which is different than a regular PAC. A large number of PACs come from corporations, and these PACs have limitations that are put on by governmental limits. But with a super PAC, they are as long as they're not coordinated. I mean, they can't coordinate with a campaign or an elected official, but they can spend unlimited amounts of money to advocate for a special interest, to support a candidate, or to even oppose a candidate. And a lot of PACs basically will give money to incumbents because most of the time incumbents will win. When we talk about who contributes to Republicans, usually it's real estate, financial, agriculture. If we talk about who contributes money to the Democratic Party, lawyers, labor unions, Hollywood. And that whole super PAC thing kind of evolved out of a case called Citizens United versus the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, where it was determined that you can't limit the amount of money that a corporation or a labor union or a super PAC tries to spend when they are either supporting a candidate or opposing a candidate. If you oppose that, I mean, if you limit the amount of money, it's a violation of their free speech rights. And all of this activity, interest group activity, is protected by the First Amendment. No ideological interest groups like, pro-choice groups, just the generalities of it, pro-choice, pro-life groups, Emily's List, which is an organization that funds campaigns for women that are pro-choice candidates. No farmer rights movements in California. We talked about, the United Farm Workers movement, just the generalities of that. Trade association groups like the Chamber of Commerce, women interest groups like the National Organization of Women, civil rights organizations, civil rights interest groups like the NAACP, which is the oldest civil rights interest group, and the Urban League. Also know LGBTQIA rights interest groups like Equality California and GLAAD, just the generalities, just, know the differences in these groups, which are, difference based off of their goals. Okay, so talking about voting in elections, the demographics for Republicans and Democrats, generally it's more likely a woman is going to be Democrat as opposed to a man. More men are Republican than women. Know the terms realignment and de-alignment. Realignment is when a group of people detach themselves from a political party and become independent. Realignment is a little bit different. Realignment is when, let me check. Realignment is when a demographic group leaves a party and becomes part of another party. One thing I don't agree with the author on in the text was he mentions that Catholics are a staple of the Democratic Party. that might have been true in the past, like in the 50s, 60s. But when we roll into the 70s, the 80s, I think due to social issues such as same-sex marriage, abortion, stem cell research, a lot of members of the Catholic Church has kind of realigned themselves from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. So that's an example of realignment. Know what the responsible party system is. Remember, we can't we can't really, or even parties cannot really have any direct means of holding elected officials responsible for not carrying out their campaign promises, which is kind of outside of what we kind of feel with regards to the concept of pluralism, where you can, but in a sense, we really don't, because like 90% of the time, people that are incumbents who are already in office will win re-election. One thing that we need to focus on also is kind of that median voter theorem. Remember, the one thing that we discussed was, if a candidate wants to win an election, they have to appeal to the people in the middle. Remember, both the left and right will have kind of their base. But one thing that we have to understand is that in order to win an election, you have to appeal to the ideological middle. So you have to be able to move yourself along the ideological spectrum in order to gain votes. Because remember, that's where the majority of the votes are going to be, in the ideological middle. And as with anything, the first goal of the party is always to win, right? That's the first goal of the party. Know some of the third-party candidates, like are the third parties out there, like the Libertarians, which is the most successful. The Green Party is another one that has had some effect on our system in the past, especially in the 2000 election. Sometimes these third parties are not necessarily successful because they do not have ballot access. They're not on ballots in each of the 50 states. For example, the Libertarian Party is only on ballots in 33 of the 50 states. And I think the Green Party is in the 22, I believe that's how many states they are on the ballots in. So about 20, 22, 23. And know the participation rates in the US, usually in the presidential election, it's about 60%. In midterms, it's around 30, which is, we're having a midterm election coming up, and usually it's roughly half in the midterm election as far as participation, as opposed to the presidential election. Okay, let's go back up here really quick. We talked about the demographics for the Republicans and the Democrats. Generally, the Republicans are going to be male, older. Democrats tend to be more female, younger people. And, when we kind of talk about the evolution of the Democratic Party, after the New Deal, where we had a lot of New Deal Democrats out there, many of the Democrats, especially in the South, were not too keen on the civil rights movement. So, and the hippie and counterculture movements that were out there. So they defected and, in a sense, created their own party called the Dixiecrats, which eventually evolved and merged into the Republican Party. Know the Federalist Party and the Anti-Federalist Party. Federalist Party is, a party that wanted more kind of focus on federal government having more power, and Anti-Federalists wanted the states to have more power. Know the Whig Party, just the generalities. They are a good feeling. Don't worry about it too much. No, the Nativist Party, they were traditionally anti-Chinese, anti-Italian, anti-Irish, um, uh, Mexican. So we've kind of seen, traditionally throughout history, some type of nativist movements where a demographic or an ethnic group has been discriminated against. Know what the Tweedledee and Tweedledum falsehood is? Basically, a lot of people believe that all parties are the same, but in fact, they're very different. No positions on each of these ideology. Know what classic liberalism is and how it looks at the fact that we have situations where, hold on, I'm waiting for a car to go by in my neighborhood. Okay, so no, classic liberalism is a very small government focusing on life, liberty, and property, and the fact that a free market capitalist system, like I said, with little government intervention. Know what modern liberalism is, including, a base of a merit-based situation where we're judged based off our merit and focus on equality. Somebody that's a modern liberal will be, in favor of maybe pro-choice situation or same-sex marriage. Know what a modern conservative is? Somebody on the right, somebody that might not want bilingual education and maybe place values on nationalism. And American conservatives, might be against things like environmental protections, maybe staying as isolationists and engaging in military action only if it's authorized by the United Nations. Know what libertarianism and how that's somebody that's economically conservative as well as socially liberal. Know what fascism and reactionary thought is. A reactionary group might be somebody like the Nazis or the Taliban. The Taliban, say for instance, if we had a party here in the United States that restricted the right to vote for a demographic group, whether it be women or ethnic groups, that could be an example of a reactionary group. And know what a conservative is, generally they're of the belief, kind of the George W. Bush belief, that it's the United States' responsibility to impose democratic values on countries that do not have democracy, like the United States in Afghanistan. That's an example of neoconservatism that George W. Bush believed. Okie dokie. Do y'all have any questions, comments, or any concerns?
No, that pretty much covered it.
Pretty
A little
good.
bit more confident now.
Okay. Yeah, no, don't stress out. Just, take it slow and take it easy. You have 2 hours to complete 50 questions. My recommendation would be to fill out the study guide and in a sense, also listen to this video while you're filling out the study guide and have this all ready when you do your exam.
Perfect. Oh yeah. No, as we were going through it kind of hit me like, wow, I do remember most of this stuff.
There you go.
I got an essay due for that, son.
Yeah, I'm actually doing my job and teaching something, so that's always good to hear.
This is awesome. No, that's good. I don't have any questions.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
No worries.
Oh, I was just gonna ask. I don't know if it said this. It might have on the information, but is it going to be all multiple choice?
It is. It's majority. I think if there's any true false, it's probably like 2 or 3.
Okay.
So not a lot.
No short answers though.
No short answers. That's what the essay is kind of for. So I try to have those 3 essays due in place of kind of short essays. So you have the ability to think it out and to write it out and to really understand what we're trying to get at.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and download this. I'll post this tonight. I gotta download it and get it all ready. So if there's not any questions, I'll go ahead and call it a session. I'll stay online in case any of you have questions or if somebody else in the room shows up. All right, so other than that, good luck. Remember, finish this by Saturday and we'll be fine. All right, I'll talk to you all soon.
Good. Thank you. Bye bye.
Good one.